The kitchen doors swing open and Eleanor Thornhill feels the temperature in the dining room drop. She is wiping down table 7 when they enter, 5 men in dark suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and the air itself seems to contract around them. The hostess stand is unattended. Marco, the manager, materializes from the back office, his face pale and tight in a way Eleanor has never seen before. He catches her eye across the room and jerks his head toward the corner booth, the private one usually reserved for anniversaries and proposals. Eleanor's stomach clenches. She knows without being told that these men are dangerous. It radiates from them like heat from asphalt in summer. She approaches with her order pad clutched too tightly, her sensible work shoes silent on the polished floor. The man at the head of the table makes her breath catch, despite her fear. He is devastating in the way of sharp objects, all clean lines and cold beauty, dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. His suit fits like it was born on his body. He does not look up when she reaches the table. None of them do. They are speaking in rapid Italian, voices low and casual, and Eleanor opens her mouth to recite the specials when the words register. Her Italian is flawless, honed during a year in Florence that feels like another lifetime, and she understands every crude syllable. The beautiful man is describing her appearance in terms that make her skin burn. Mousy, he says. The kind of woman you look through, not at. His companions laugh. One of them adds a comment about her body that is more explicit, wondering aloud if there is anything worth noticing under the shapeless uniform. Eleanor stands frozen, the pad trembling in her hands. She should stay silent. Every instinct of self-preservation screams at her to take their orders in English, to pretend ignorance, to remain invisible the way she has learned to be invisible her entire life. The beautiful man continues speaking, his Italian flowing like poisoned honey. He is describing how forgettable she is, how she is the type of woman who exists only to serve and disappear, how he has already forgotten her face. Something inside Eleanor crystallizes into fury. She has spent 3 years working herself to exhaustion, has sacrificed her dreams and education, has made herself small and quiet, and unobtrusive to survive. But she will not stand here and be mocked in a language these men think is a secret code. Her voice cuts through their laughter, Italian pouring from her lips with Florentine precision, each word a blade. She tells them exactly what she thinks of men who hide cruelty behind language barriers, who mistake power for sophistication, who are so small inside their expensive suits that they must be little waitresses to feel large. The silence is absolute. Eleanor watches the blood drain from the beautiful man's face, watches shock replace arrogance in eyes the color of winter storms, and her own words seem to echo in the sudden stillness. His companions have gone rigid, their casual postures transforming into predatory alertness, and she sees hands move almost imperceptibly toward jacket interiors, where she knows with sick certainty that weapons wait. She has made a terrible mistake. The furious courage that propelled her Italian insults evaporates, leaving only crystalline terror in its wake. The man rises from his seat with the deliberate slowness of a blade being drawn, unfolding to a height that forces Eleanor to tilt her head back, and she can feel the displacement of air as he towers over her. She expects rage, violence, the consequences of humiliating someone who radiates power the way others radiate heat. But his expression is not angry. It is fascinated, intense, the look of someone who has discovered something rare and potentially valuable. He switches back to Italian, his voice low and measured as he asks where she learned to speak his language with such precision, such venom. Eleanor's customer service mask cracks like cheap porcelain. She will not explain herself to him, will not provide ammunition for whatever game he is playing. She turns to leave, her legs unsteady, desperate to escape before her bravado completely disintegrates. His hand catches her wrist. The grip is gentle, almost careful, but absolutely inescapable. Eleanor freezes, every nerve screaming danger. He releases her almost immediately, but the heat of his fingers lingers on her skin like a brand. When he speaks again, it is in English, his accent slight but unmistakable, and he does something that shocks her more than anything else tonight. He apologizes. The words sound genuine, lacking the mockery she expects, and his eyes search her face with unsettling intensity as he asks her name. Eleanor glances across the dining room, where Marco watches with the expression of someone witnessing an execution, his face pale and sheened with sweat. She knows she should lie, but something about this man's direct gaze strips away the option of dishonesty. "Eleanor Thornhill," she says, her voice steadier than she feels. He repeats her name slowly, tasting each syllable, and it sounds different in his mouth, weighted with significance she does not understand. "Alexander Montague," he offers in return, and the name resonates with recognition, though she cannot place why. He tells her they will speak again. It is not quite a threat, and not quite a promise, but something that lives in the territory between, and Eleanor knows with bone-deep certainty that her life has just pivoted on an axis she did not know existed. He releases her with a small gesture that is somehow both dismissal and invitation, settling back into his seat while his companions remain frozen, watching her with new calculation. Eleanor walks away on legs that feel disconnected from her body, her order pad still clutched in trembling hands, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, and she does not look back, though she feels his gaze tracking her across the restaurant like a physical touch. Eleanor finishes her shift in a fog of adrenaline and disbelief, her hands shaking so badly she drops a fork twice while rolling silverware, and the other servers give her a wide berth as though danger might be contagious. As though proximity to whatever she has become might infect them too. Marco corners her by the kitchen with his face still pale and drawn, his voice low and urgent as he tells her those men are connected, the kind of people who appear in news reports about federal investigations and bodies in the river. And she should have kept her mouth shut because now she is visible to them, and visibility is the most dangerous thing she could be. Eleanor nods mutely, her throat too tight for words, and she changes out of her uniform with fingers that will not cooperate with buttons, her reflection in the staff bathroom mirror showing a stranger with wide, frightened eyes and color high on her cheeks like fever. The drive to her apartment takes 20 minutes but feels like hours. Her hands locked on the steering wheel of her 10-year-old sedan with its cracked dashboard and temperamental heater, and she checks her mirrors obsessively, searching for headlights that follow too consistently, for patterns in the random flow of traffic. Her neighborhood is modest in the way that means old buildings with bars on ground floor windows, laundromats with flickering signs, corner stores that close before dark, the kind of place where people work two jobs and mind their own business because survival requires tunnel vision. Her apartment is a studio on the third floor, furnished with thrift store finds and IKEA particle board, the walls thin enough that she knows her neighbors' television schedules and argument patterns. But it is hers, and the rent is manageable even with her mother's care facility fees draining her bank account to fumes every month. She makes coffee she will not drink and sits by the window, telling herself that Marco is paranoid, that men like Alexander Montague do not waste energy on waitresses who insult them, that tomorrow this will feel like a fever dream. Then she sees the car. It is black and expensive, idling across the street beneath a broken streetlight, its windows tinted dark enough that she cannot see inside, but she knows with sick certainty that someone is watching her window, watching her. Eleanor does not sleep, her mind replaying the encounter in obsessive loops, the shock on Alexander's face, the fascination that followed, the way he said her name like he was memorizing it. And dawn finds her hollow-eyed and jittery with exhaustion. The knock at her door makes her jump hard enough to spill cold coffee across her thrift store table. The delivery man holds flowers, a massive arrangement of Italian roses in shades of cream and blush, their perfume heavy and sweet, and there is no card, but Eleanor knows who sent them with the same certainty she knows the black car is still waiting outside. She calls in sick to her morning shift at the bookstore, unable to face the world. But by noon, restlessness drives her out, because she will not be a prisoner in her own life, and the black car follows her at a discreet distance, a shadow she cannot shake. That evening, she stands in her apartment considering her options, her bank account balance, her pride, and she knows she should call in sick to the restaurant too, should hide and hope Alexander loses interest. But she needs the money desperately. Her mother's care facility costs more every year, and some stubborn part of her refuses to cower. Eleanor goes to work with her chin lifted and her stomach knotted with dread. Alexander is already there, alone this time without his dangerous entourage, seated in her section at a small table by the window, and his eyes track her the moment she enters the dining room, a slight smile touching his severe mouth as though he has been waiting for her, as though he knew she would come, and she realizes with a strange flutter of something between fear and anticipation that he has requested her specifically. Eleanor approaches Alexander's table with her order pad clutched like a shield, her professional smile fixed in place, though her pulse hammers against her throat, and he looks different tonight, without the dangerous men flanking him like attack dogs. Though danger still clings to him, the way expensive cologne lingers in the air after someone passes, something dark and compelling that makes her hyper-aware of every movement he makes. He orders in English, his accent turning ordinary words into something that sounds like a promise or a threat, and she writes down his requests with hands that are steadier than yesterday, though her knees feel like water beneath her black slacks. The small talk begins casually, questions about the menu that feel like interrogation, his winter gray eyes watching her face with an intensity that makes her skin prickle, and when he asks about her Italian again, she gives him minimal answers. Florence, a study abroad program, nothing more. Alexander is patient in a way that suggests he is accustomed to getting what he wants eventually, revealing small pieces of himself like someone laying down cards one at a time. And he tells her he grew up between New York and Sicily, that his father built an empire from nothing, that he never expected to find someone in this neighborhood who spoke his mother's language with the fury and precision she showed 2 nights ago. Eleanor feels herself thawing slightly despite her better judgment, admitting that she spent a year in Florence studying art history and language, that the city was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. And his expression shifts to something almost wistful as he describes the hills of Sicily where his grandmother still lives, in a house older than America. Then he asks why she did not finish her degree, and the question strikes a wound she thought she had armored over, the raw place where her dreams died when her mother got sick, and Eleanor became the only person who could manage the medical decisions and the bills, and the slow, terrible grief of watching someone disappear piece by piece. Family illness, she says shortly, her voice clipped enough that he should understand the topic is closed. Alexander does not push, does not pry, and something in his expression suggests he understands the weight of obligation and sacrifice in ways most people never will. Instead, he finishes his meal with comments about the food and the neighborhood, easy conversation that feels like a break between storms. And when Eleanor brings the check, he places a business card on top of a cash tip so large her breath catches. His legitimate restaurant needs someone bilingual for international clients, he tells her, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that makes the dining room fade to irrelevance. The pay is triple what she makes working 2 jobs, benefits included, hours that would let her sleep, and maybe remember what it feels like to be something other than exhausted. Eleanor knows this is a pretext, that Alexander Montague did not become whoever he is by genuinely needing a translator from a waitress he met by accident. But the offer is tempting in a way that makes her chest ache with possibility. She takes the card to avoid confrontation, her fingers brushing his for a half-second that feels electric, and Alexander smiles, the expression transforming his severe features into something almost beautiful, warmth breaking through the ice. He leaves with a nod that feels like a dismissal and a beginning, and Eleanor stands holding his card for a full minute before she can make her legs move again, the rest of her shift passing in a blur of routine while her mind circles obsessively around the card in her apron pocket. The impossible offer, the dangerous interest in his eyes. And that night, she lies awake staring at the embossed lettering until the words blur and reform and blur again, knowing she should throw it away, knowing she will not. 3 days pass like a prison sentence, and Eleanor does not call the number on Alexander's card, though she carries it in her wallet like evidence of a crime, and the black car continues its surveillance with patient precision, always there when she leaves for work or returns home, a shadow she cannot shake no matter which route she takes through the city. She feels trapped between fear and curiosity, between the smart choice and the impossible offer, and on her day off she drives to Meadowbrook Care Facility on the edge of the suburbs where her mother lives in a bright room that costs more per month than Eleanor's rent and utilities combined. Her mother is 54 but looks older, the dementia stealing her piece by piece, and today is a good day, which means she recognizes Eleanor for the first 10 minutes before confusion clouds her eyes, and she asks when Eleanor's father is coming, even though he has been dead for 6 years. Eleanor sits holding her mother's hand and telling harmless lies about her life, omitting the danger and the flowers and the man with winter-gray eyes who has somehow infiltrated every corner of her existence. And when she goes to sign out at the nurse's station, a woman named Patricia mentions casually that a benefactor paid this month's fees in full, that Eleanor does not need to worry about the payment plan for once. Eleanor's blood runs cold, her hands gripping the counter hard enough that her knuckles turn white, and she demands to know who made the payment, her voice sharp enough that Patricia steps back with wide eyes. The administration cannot reveal donor information, privacy policies, and legal protections, but Eleanor knows with sick certainty exactly who signed that check, and fury burns through the fear like gasoline igniting. She sits in her car shaking with rage because Alexander Montague has reached into the most private, vulnerable part of her life without permission, buying leverage or goodwill or some combination that makes her feel like a thing to be acquired, rather than a person to be respected. Eleanor pulls out his card and calls the number with fingers that tremble, and a smooth male voice answers with a name she does not recognize, listening as she demands to speak with Alexander immediately. And instead of arguing, the man gives her an address in the financial district and tells her Mr. Montague is available now if she would like to discuss matters in person. Eleanor goes because anger overrides caution, because she will not be manipulated or managed, and the location is an elegant Italian restaurant called Serafina with white tablecloths and soft lighting and prices on the menu that make her monthly grocery budget look like pocket change. She is escorted by a hostess who seems to expect her, led through the dining room where beautiful people eat beautiful food, and into a private office where Alexander sits behind a massive mahogany desk, reviewing papers with reading glasses that make him look almost scholarly until he glances up and removes them. Eleanor unleashes her rage without preamble, telling him she is not for sale, that he had no right to invade her life and make decisions about her mother's care, that whatever game he thinks he is playing, she will not participate, and Alexander listens without defending himself, his expression grave and still, letting her fury exhaust itself against his silence. Then he speaks, his voice quiet and careful, explaining that yes, he had her investigated because that is standard procedure when someone enters his awareness unexpectedly, that he learned about her mother and the financial strain and the sacrifices Eleanor makes daily, and the payment was not manipulation, but restitution for his disrespect that first night, an apology with meaning rather than empty words. He opens a folder and slides it across the desk, documentation showing a legitimate employment contract with salary and benefits and tax paperwork, everything legal and above board, and he tells her his world is complicated, but this offer is clean, that she can verify every detail with lawyers or accountants if she wishes, because he wants her to choose this position with full knowledge rather than desperation or coercion. Eleanor wants to refuse on principle because accepting feels like surrender, like allowing Alexander Montague to reshape her life according to his will. but the money would change everything in ways she can barely let herself imagine. And she stands in his office with the contract between them like a bridge she is terrified to cross. She could afford better care for her mother, the kind with music therapy and specialized memory programs, instead of just clean rooms and adequate meals. Could stop working herself into exhaustion at two jobs that leave her hollow and perpetually behind on sleep. Could maybe remember what it feels like to breathe without the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her chest. Alexander watches her internal struggle with knowing eyes that suggest he has seen this calculation before, desperation fighting pride, and he leans back in his chair with the patience of someone who understands that silence is a weapon and a gift depending on how you wield it. Then he adds another truth, his voice dropping into a register that feels dangerously intimate in the quiet office, telling her he is fascinated by her, and not just her language skills. Though those are impressive, but her courage to challenge him in front of his men, the fire that burned through her fear, and he has not stopped thinking about her since that night, about the way she stood trembling but defiant, about how someone so seemingly ordinary revealed herself to be absolutely extraordinary. Eleanor feels the pull of attraction despite her better judgment screaming warnings, her body responding to his proximity and his attention in ways that make her feel reckless and alive. And she recognizes the danger in wanting someone like Alexander Montague, someone whose hands have likely done terrible things, whose world operates by rules she barely understands. But he is honest about what he is, no pretense or false nobility, just a man offering her a choice with full knowledge of the consequences, and there is something almost honorable in that brutal transparency. She accepts the job with conditions that feel like armor against inevitability, telling him this is employment only, that she will not be pulled into his other business. Whatever darkness funds the legitimate restaurant, and he will stop having her followed because she cannot live with eyes on her constantly. Alexander agrees to the first two conditions with a slight nod, but refuses the third, his expression hardening into something immovable, explaining that her safety is now his concern, whether she likes it or not. That people saw her humiliate him in front of his organization, and in his world that creates complications, attention from rivals who might see her as leverage or weakness. Eleanor realizes with cold clarity that she has stepped into something far more complex than a job offer, that Alexander is telling her she has become a piece on a board she cannot see, protected but also constrained, valued but also vulnerable. He stands and comes around the desk, close enough that she has to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and he tells her he will introduce her to Sophia, who manages Serafina, that the position is real with duties and expectations and professional standards, but she should understand that danger is real too, and if she takes this job, she takes all of it, the money and the risk, the opportunity and the threat. Eleanor's heart pounds against her ribs like something caged, and she says yes before fear can stop her. Yes to the job and the complications. Yes to Alexander's world with its beautiful surfaces and violent undercurrents. And his smile is triumphant and relieved and hungry all at once. Eleanor begins working at Serafina on a Monday evening when the city feels like it holds its breath between summer and autumn. And the restaurant is more beautiful than anywhere she has ever worked, with its cream-colored walls and dark wood trim, and tables set with crystal that catches light like captured stars. The job is legitimate, in the sense that there are schedules and paychecks and health insurance. But the clientele is decidedly not legitimate. And Eleanor recognizes this within her first week as she learns to read the signs. Men who speak too quietly and carry themselves with the coiled readiness of predators. Politicians whose faces she knows from news coverage sitting with people whose faces never appear in photographs. Women dripping diamonds who look at her with calculation as if assessing whether she is a threat or merely furniture. Her role is translating for Italian business associates when they meet with Alexander or his partners, facilitating conversations that range from wine importation to subjects discussed in careful euphemism. And Sophia becomes an unexpected ally in navigating this dangerous landscape. Sophia is 40 with shrewd dark eyes and the kind of competence that comes from surviving in Alexander's world for over a decade. And she explains the unspoken rules during Eleanor's training with the bluntness of someone who has seen what happens when rules are broken. Never repeat what you hear, even if it sounds innocuous, because context is everything. Never ask questions about the men in dark suits who sometimes use the private dining rooms for hours without ordering food. Never show fear because these people can smell vulnerability, like sharks smell blood. And understand that Alexander protects his people fiercely, but only if they demonstrate absolute loyalty. Eleanor excels at the work in ways that surprise her because her language skills extend beyond Italian to include the French she studied in college and conversational Spanish from high school. And she discovers she has a talent for reading the temperature of a room and adjusting her presence accordingly, making herself useful without being intrusive, translating not just words, but tone and implication. Alexander watches her navigate his world with surprising grace, and their interactions remain professional on the surface, but charge the air between them like gathering electricity before a storm. He finds excuses to summon her to his office for clarifications on translations that do not really need clarifying, keeps her late to discuss scheduling matters that Sophia could easily handle, and Eleanor pretends not to notice the weight of his attention, though her skin prickles with awareness every time he enters a room. Weeks pass and her life transforms in tangible ways as she pays off the medical debts that have crushed her for 3 years, moves her mother to Willowbrook, which has gardens and art therapy and staff who remember patient preferences, and sleeps through the night for the first time in recent memory, without anxiety jolting her awake at 3 in the morning. But her awareness of danger grows in proportion to her material comfort because she overhears things while translating. Names spoken with reverence or contempt, shipments arriving at warehouses she suspects contain more than olive oil and wine, territorial disputes discussed with the clinical detachment of generals planning campaigns. One evening in late October, a meeting goes catastrophically wrong when voices rise in the private dining room, where Eleanor is translating a negotiation between Alexander and a supplier from Naples, and the supplier accuses Alexander of betrayal, of cutting him out of a distribution network, and the man reaches for something inside his jacket with murder in his eyes. Alexander's security intervenes before violence erupts in the private dining room, and Eleanor feels hands grip her shoulders as Sophia materializes behind her, with the efficient urgency of someone trained for exactly this kind of crisis, pulling her backward through the service door while the room explodes into controlled chaos behind them. Men moving with practiced precision to neutralize the threat, and Eleanor's heart hammers so hard she can feel it in her throat as Sophia rushes her down the hallway toward the kitchen. She hears crashes and shouts in Italian, some voices raised in command and others in pain, and then an abrupt and terrible silence that feels worse than the noise because she doesn't know what it means, whether Alexander is hurt or triumphant, whether blood has been spilled in that elegant room with its cream walls and crystal. Sophia keeps Eleanor moving through the kitchen where staff keep their heads down and ask no questions, out into the back corridor that smells like garlic and wine, and Eleanor realizes she is shaking, adrenaline flooding her system in delayed response to how close she just came to witnessing real violence or perhaps becoming collateral damage in someone else's war. Then Alexander appears at the end of the hallway, still buttoning his shirt cuffs with hands that seem steady. But Eleanor notices the missing suit jacket and the cut above his left eyebrow, a thin line of blood trailing toward his temple, and his eyes find hers immediately with an intensity that makes everything else fade into background noise. He reaches her in 4 long strides, and his hands are on her face, turning her head gently from side to side as he checks for injuries with a focus that feels almost clinical, except for the way his fingers tremble slightly against her skin, asking in Italian if she is hurt, then switching to English when she doesn't answer immediately. And Eleanor realizes the facade of absolute control has cracked to reveal genuine fear underneath, fear for her specifically. She tells him she is fine, that Sophia got her out before anything happened, But Alexander's expression doesn't soften, and he tells Sophia she did well, his voice carrying authority and gratitude, then says he is taking Eleanor home personally, and it is not a suggestion. The drive happens in the close confines of Alexander's car, a black sedan with leather seats and tinted windows that smell like his cologne, and Eleanor sits in the passenger seat, acutely aware of his presence beside her, the controlled violence still radiating from him like heat from pavement after a storm. She asks what she has gotten involved in, her voice steadier than she feels. And Alexander's jaw tightens as he navigates evening traffic with the aggressive precision of someone who learned to drive in Rome. Then he is honest in a way that feels like a gift and a warning. A rival family is challenging his territory, testing his defenses, and things will get worse before they stabilize because weakness in his world is blood in the water. He can arrange a leave of absence with full pay, keep her safe and away from the escalating conflict, and Eleanor surprises herself by refusing because she will not hide, will not let fear make her small again after she has finally started taking up space in the world. Alexander's expression shifts to something complicated, admiration and frustration warring across his features as he pulls up outside her apartment building, and he walks her to her door despite her protest that it is unnecessary, his hand at the small of her back possessive and protective. The moment stretches at her threshold, Eleanor intensely aware of his proximity and size, the violence he is capable of, and the gentleness he shows her. These contradictions that should repel her, but instead draw her closer like gravity, and Alexander touches her face with his thumb, tracing her cheekbone in a gesture so tender it makes her breath catch. He says something in Italian, soft and almost wondering, and it takes Eleanor a moment to translate through the haze of her awareness. "You are becoming dangerous to me," the words carrying layers of meaning about vulnerability and power, and how she has somehow become the thing that could destroy his carefully constructed control. Eleanor's world narrows to the restaurant, and Alexander's orbit over the following weeks, as November settles over the city, with early darkness and cold rain that matches the tension thickening around them. And she learns to read the moods of his organization, the way sailors read weather. Understanding that when James Carstairs appears without his usual sardonic smile, it means intelligence reports have brought bad news. That when Thomas Pembroke cracks his knuckles repeatedly, someone has overstepped boundaries and will be reminded of their place. That when Sophia starts closing the restaurant early, it means meetings are happening that require absolute privacy. The tension with the rival family escalates in ways both visible and invisible as security tightens around Serafina, with additional cameras installed and unfamiliar men in dark suits positioned at strategic points, and Alexander becomes increasingly protective of Eleanor in ways that frustrate her independence, even as they reveal the depth of his concern. Assigning a driver named Marcus, despite her protests that she can manage her own transportation, a quiet man in his 50s who worked as Alexander's father's bodyguard, and now watches Eleanor with paternal vigilance. She meets more of Alexander's inner circle during this time, and each introduction feels like a test she must pass to remain in his world. James Carstairs with his Oxford education and ice-water composure, who analyzes her with the clinical interest of someone assessing assets and liabilities. Thomas Pembroke, whose volatility radiates from him like heat, and who treats her with cautious respect only because Alexander has claimed her. And most significantly, Catherine Sinclair, who appears one evening at Serafina like a queen surveying her kingdom. A woman in her late 60s with silver hair worn in an elegant chignon and eyes that miss absolutely nothing. Catherine is Alexander's aunt on his mother's side, and the family matriarch who built the foundation that Alexander inherited when his father died. And she takes immediate interest in Eleanor with the focused attention of a jeweler examining a stone for flaws, testing her with pointed questions in rapid Sicilian dialect that differs from the Italian Eleanor learned in Florence, but she adapts quickly enough to hold her ground. Catherine switches between languages without warning, asking about Eleanor's family and education and intentions regarding her nephew, and Eleanor answers honestly because she senses this woman will detect any deception, admitting her mother's illness and her incomplete degree, and her certainty that Alexander is dangerous, but her growing inability to imagine her life without him in it. Catherine studies her for a long moment, that stretches Eleanor's nerves taut, then smiles with genuine warmth and tells Alexander in Italian that he has finally found someone with a spine, the comment suggesting there were others before Eleanor who lacked whatever quality Catherine values, and Eleanor feels an irrational stab of jealousy at the thought of other women in Alexander's life, even though she has no claim to his past. Her feelings are growing beyond what is safe or controllable, spreading through her like roots through soil until she cannot distinguish where her old self ends and this new version begins. The woman who translates for criminals and sleeps fitfully dreaming of gray eyes and violence. One evening in mid-November, Alexander asks Eleanor to accompany him to a charity gala at the Metropolitan Club, ostensibly as his translator for Italian donors, but both of them understand the invitation means far more than professional assistance, that appearing at his side at such a public event is a statement to his world and hers that she occupies a specific place in his life. Eleanor understands the implications with crystalline clarity as she stands in her apartment holding the phone after he asks, knowing that accepting means stepping fully into his world without the pretense of professional distance, and she says yes, despite, or perhaps because of the fear curling in her stomach. The gala is 4 days away, and suddenly her wardrobe of modest dresses and work clothes feels impossibly inadequate for the world she is entering. But the next morning a delivery arrives containing a dress of midnight blue silk that fits her perfectly, and Eleanor understands Alexander has been paying attention to more than just her translations. Eleanor wears the midnight blue dress on the evening of the gala and stands before her bathroom mirror, barely recognizing herself because the silk drapes across her body like water, transforming her from invisible waitress into someone who might actually belong in Alexander's world. The neckline modest but elegant, and the cut somehow making her look taller and more confident than she feels, and she has styled her hair into a soft updo with tendrils framing her face, applied makeup with a steadier hand than expected, considering her nerves are vibrating like plucked strings. Marcus drives her to the Metropolitan Club in silence that feels respectful rather than awkward, and when they pull up to the entrance with its limestone facade and uniformed doormen, Eleanor's breath catches, because this is real. She is actually doing this, stepping into Alexander's life in full view of everyone who matters in his world. Alexander waits inside the lobby, and his expression when he sees her makes every moment of anxiety worth it, because something unguarded crosses his face before control reasserts itself, admiration and possession, and something softer that makes her stomach flip. And he takes her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that feels European and intimate, telling her in Italian that she is breathtaking, that every man here will envy him tonight. The gala unfolds in a grand ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers and old money, women in gowns that cost more than Eleanor's monthly rent, and men in tuxedos discussing business deals worth millions, and Alexander never leaves her side with his hand a constant presence at the small of her back, that proprietary touch that broadcasts to everyone watching exactly what she means to him. He introduces her as his associate to donors and colleagues, but everyone reads between the lines, their eyes assessing her worth and finding her wanting or surprising depending on their expectations. And Eleanor handles it with confidence she summons from some deep reserve she did not know she possessed. A silver-haired Italian industrialist engages her in rapid conversation about Florence, and she responds with details about the Uffizi and her favorite trattoria near Santo Spirito, her language skills and genuine knowledge impressing him enough that he tells Alexander he has excellent taste in all things, the compliment making her feel like a possession and a partner simultaneously. Eleanor translates for a group of donors considering an investment in one of Alexander's legitimate ventures, and she watches him work the room with effortless charisma, the dangerous man hidden beneath urbane sophistication, and she realizes how carefully he controls the face he shows the world. During dinner, she sits beside him at a table with a city councilman and his wife, a federal judge, and a businessman she recognizes from financial news, and the conversations dance around topics both innocent and shadowed, and Eleanor contributes enough to seem engaged, but not so much that she draws unwanted attention. When the orchestra begins playing, Alexander stands and offers his hand and leads her to the dance floor, pulling her into his arms closer than strictly appropriate for a waltz. And Eleanor lets herself sink into the fantasy of being someone who belongs in this world of wealth and power and barely concealed danger. He moves with surprising grace for such a large man, and she follows his lead easily, their bodies finding rhythm together, and Alexander murmurs against her ear that she is remarkable, that she has exceeded every expectation. Eleanor confesses what she has been holding back all evening, that she is terrified of his world and what she feels, and how much she wants this despite knowing better, the words tumbling out in a whisper, and Alexander stops dancing right there in the middle of the floor, his hands tightening on her waist as he searches her face with an intensity that makes everything else fade away. He admits in a voice rough with honesty that he is terrified too, that he has never felt this way before, this need to protect someone and keep them close, that his world destroys soft things. But Eleanor is not soft, not really. She is steel wrapped in shyness, and that makes her dangerous to him in ways he cannot fully articulate. The moment stretches between them fragile and essential, and then Thomas appears at Alexander's elbow with urgency in his eyes and tension in his shoulders. The expression Eleanor has learned means something has gone very wrong, and he murmurs that a situation requires immediate attention, that the rival family has made a move tonight while Alexander was distracted by the gala. Alexander orders Thomas to take Eleanor home immediately, his voice carrying the absolute authority that men obey without question. But Eleanor refuses with a clarity that surprises even herself, because if something is happening, she will not be dismissed like a child or a liability to be protected and hidden away, while decisions are made about threats she is apparently part of, whether Alexander likes it or not. Alexander's jaw tightens, and she can see the conflict warring across his face, the instinct to protect her battling against something else, perhaps recognition that she has earned the right to understand the dangers swirling around them both. And after a moment that stretches taut as a wire, he makes a decision that Thomas clearly disagrees with based on the tension that crosses the enforcer's features. Alexander brings Eleanor to an emergency meeting at a secure location, a warehouse in an industrial area that has been converted into something between an office and a fortress, and she sits silently in a leather chair against the wall as Alexander and his lieutenants discuss strategy in rapid Italian and English that switches between languages so quickly she has to concentrate to follow every thread. The rival boss, George Ravenscroft, has kidnapped one of Alexander's couriers, a young man named Danny, who handles sensitive deliveries between territories, and it is a direct challenge that cannot be ignored because in Alexander's world, perception is reality, and appearing weak invites aggression from every direction. Alexander must respond, or the carefully maintained balance of power will shatter, but the response must be calculated rather than emotional, overwhelming force rather than desperate retaliation. And Eleanor listens to them debate options, while piecing together the dangerous chess game being played with human lives as pieces. James advocates for an immediate strike against one of Ravenscroft's holdings, something proportional that demonstrates strength, while Thomas wants something more personal and violent, his rage at the disrespect barely contained, and Catherine, who has arrived within 20 minutes of being summoned, counsels patience and intelligence gathering before action. Eleanor notices something the men miss as she reviews the message Ravenscroft sent, the Italian phrasing containing a double meaning that native speakers might overlook precisely because they are too fluent, too embedded in the language to see the deliberate awkwardness of the construction. She interrupts the debate with a hesitant voice that nevertheless carries across the room, explaining that the translation they are working from misses a nuance, That the way Ravenscroft wrote about the courier suggests the kidnapping itself might be misdirection, a distraction from the real move he is making while Alexander's forces focus on recovering Danny. The room goes silent as every dangerous man turns to look at her, and Eleanor feels the weight of their attention like physical pressure. But Alexander's eyes hold something different than the others, a fierce pride mixed with concentration as he processes what she is saying. James immediately pulls up property records and security reports on his laptop, cross-referencing locations that might be vulnerable while attention is diverted. And Eleanor watches the pieces fall into place as her insight reveals that Ravenscroft is actually targeting one of Alexander's warehouses on the waterfront, the one that handles the highest value shipments, both legal and otherwise, the kidnapping time to draw Alexander's forces away from the real prize. Alexander looks at Eleanor with something that transcends attraction or even affection, something closer to recognition of an equal partner, respect earned through capability rather than granted through sentiment. And he redirects his forces with swift efficiency, sending Thomas and a security team to secure the warehouse while James coordinates with their people at the docks. The courier Danny is located within 90 minutes, held in a basement in Queens, but guarded by only 2 men because Ravenscroft never intended the kidnapping to be anything more than theater. And the warehouse is secured before Ravenscroft's team arrives to find Alexander's people waiting for them with the kind of overwhelming force that ends ambitions quickly. A potential disaster is averted because Eleanor spoke up, because she saw what others missed. And as the reports come in confirming both operations successful, Alexander crosses the room to where she sits and takes her face between his hands and kisses her in front of everyone, a public claim and acknowledgement that she has become something more than a woman he protects. She is part of his inner circle now with everything that entails. After the crisis, Alexander brings Eleanor to his private residence for the first time, and the drive passes in charged silence with his hand covering hers on the seat between them, their fingers intertwined with an intimacy that feels both new and inevitable after everything that has happened tonight. The penthouse occupies the top 2 floors of a building in the financial district and reflects wealth expressed through restraint rather than ostentation. All clean lines and expensive materials, and floor-to-ceiling windows that frame the city like a painting, the space beautiful but oddly impersonal, as though Alexander lives here without truly inhabiting it. He pours them both whiskey from a crystal decanter with hands that shake slightly, the only visible sign that adrenaline is still working through his system. And Eleanor accepts the glass, watching him struggle for composure, because she has never seen him anything less than absolutely controlled until now. She stands by the windows, overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city below, processing everything that happened, the danger and the violence barely averted, and her own role in changing the outcome, and she feels Alexander approach from behind, not touching, but close enough that she feels his heat like a furnace at her back. He thanks her in a voice rough with emotion he is not bothering to hide, and Eleanor turns to face him, the movement bringing them inches apart in the dim light filtering through the windows. She asks what happens now, and the question carries layers of meaning, referring to the war with Ravenscroft, but also to whatever is building between them, this thing that has grown from attraction into something far more complicated and essential. Alexander frames her face with both hands, his palms warm against her cheeks, and tells her with devastating honesty that he has spent his entire life controlling everything and trusting no one completely, because in his world, trust is a weakness that gets people killed. But Eleanor has become essential to him in ways he cannot fully articulate, a necessity rather than a choice. He cannot promise her safety, because his world will always carry danger, and she has seen enough tonight to understand that reality, but he can promise honesty and protection and fidelity. And he wants her in his life, truly in it, not hidden away or kept separate from the complicated, dangerous reality of who he is, if she is brave enough to choose that. Eleanor rises on her toes and kisses him instead of answering with words because some things are too large for language, and the kiss ignites something that has been building between them for weeks. Alexander lifting her with easy strength and carrying her away from the exposed windows toward the bedroom. The night unravels into intimacy that feels both inevitable and revelatory, and Eleanor discovers the man beneath the armor, his body marked with scars that map a violent history, his touch surprisingly tender for someone capable of such brutality, his focus on her pleasure absolute and patient. Afterward, they lie tangled in sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and Alexander traces idle patterns on her skin, his fingers mapping her body with the same attention he brings to everything, and he tells her things he has never shared with anyone, about his father's brutality and his mother's quiet strength, about inheriting an empire at 22 and learning to be ruthless because hesitation meant death, about the loneliness of power and the isolation of never being able to trust anyone completely. Eleanor listens and offers her own truths in return, about her mother's slow disappearance into dementia and the guilt of sometimes wishing the disease would progress faster to end the terrible limbo, about abandoning her dreams to become a caretaker and the resentment she feels ashamed to acknowledge, and Alexander holds her through the confession with a tenderness that makes her chest ache. Eleanor wakes in Alexander's bed to find him already awake, watching her with an expression so unguarded and affectionate that it transforms his face into something younger and less weighted by violence. And morning light filters through the floor-to-ceiling windows, softening all his dangerous edges, until he looks almost gentle, lying there beside her. He brings her coffee prepared exactly how she likes it, though she never told him, which means he has been paying attention to details she thought insignificant, and they talk with a new ease that comes from barriers broken and truths exchanged in darkness, their conversation ranging from inconsequential observations about the city waking below to deeper questions about what comes next. Alexander explains his plan for handling Ravenscroft with a strategic mind that Eleanor is learning to appreciate, describing how he intends to call for a formal meeting of the families to establish new territorial boundaries, because the alternative is escalating violence that will draw unwanted attention from law enforcement and damage everyone's operations. And it is risky, because gathering powerful men in one location creates opportunity for betrayal, but necessary to demonstrate strength and willingness to negotiate from a position of power rather than defensiveness. Eleanor asks if she can help and sees the refusal forming on his lips, the instinctive protectiveness that wants to keep her away from anything dangerous. But something shifts in his expression as he recognizes the hypocrisy of bringing her fully into his life while still trying to shield her from its realities. Alexander admits that her perspective is uniquely valuable precisely because it is unbiased by years embedded in his world, that she sees patterns and meanings others miss because she approaches situations without the assumptions that come from a lifetime in organized crime. And Eleanor feels something settle in her chest at being valued for her mind rather than simply protected for her vulnerability. Days of preparation follow, and Eleanor becomes part of strategy sessions held in secure locations, her translations going beyond simple language conversion to cultural interpretation that helps Alexander understand the nuances of communications from Italian associates and rivals. Her insights about phrasing and emphasis, valued by men who initially viewed her presence with skepticism that has gradually transformed into grudging respect. Catherine visits Alexander's penthouse one afternoon and finds Eleanor reviewing documents at the dining table that has been converted into a makeshift office, and the older woman sits without invitation, offering observations about family politics and territorial history that provide context Eleanor lacks. And before leaving, Catherine tells her privately that she is good for Alexander in ways that go beyond affection or attraction, that he seems more human lately and less like the cold, efficient machine his father tried to create. The observation settles something in Eleanor because it confirms she is not just swept up in Alexander's world like debris in a current, but rather has a place in it that she is actively creating through capability and choice. The meeting is set at Neutral Ground, a private club in Manhattan that serves as traditional territory for inter-family negotiations, and Alexander insists Eleanor stay behind where she will be safe, but she argues her way into accompanying him with logic he cannot refute, promising to remain in the background observing rather than participating directly. The meeting includes representatives from 5 families, and the atmosphere crackles with tension barely contained by centuries of tradition governing such gatherings. And Ravenscroft arrives with an entourage that includes hard-eyed men who radiate violence and an older advisor who says nothing but watches everything. Eleanor positions herself along the wall where she can observe without drawing attention, and Ravenscroft is arrogant in his posturing, assuming his recent aggression has demonstrated weakness in Alexander's organization rather than restraint, and Eleanor watches the careful dance of threat and counter-threat while her mind catalogues details others might dismiss as insignificant. The negotiation reaches a stalemate within the first hour, and Eleanor watches from her position along the wall as Ravenscroft leans back in his chair with the confidence of a man who believes he holds all the leverage, demanding territory that includes 3 of Alexander's most profitable operations in Brooklyn and Queens, concessions so extreme they amount to capitulation rather than compromise, and Alexander's refusal is calm but absolute, his voice never rising but carrying a weight that makes several men around the table shift uncomfortably. Tension spikes toward violence as Ravenscroft's men exchange glances, and hands drift toward concealed weapons, the centuries of tradition governing these meetings suddenly feeling fragile against the pressure of territorial ambition and wounded pride, and Eleanor's heart hammers against her ribs as she calculates distances to exits and wonders if she will witness bloodshed in this elegant room with its dark wood paneling and crystal chandeliers. She forces herself to breathe slowly and observe rather than panic, her mind cataloging details the way Alexander taught her during preparation sessions, and she notices something that breaks through her fear with the clarity of pattern recognition. Ravenscroft keeps glancing at one of his advisors, an older man who has said nothing throughout the entire negotiation, but sits with the stillness of someone completely secure in his power, his weathered face revealing nothing but his eyes tracking every word and gesture with an intelligence that suggests he is the one truly evaluating Alexander's responses. Eleanor leans close to Alexander, her movements subtle enough not to draw attention from across the table, and whispers in Italian that the advisor is the real power and Ravenscroft is performing for his approval rather than making actual decisions, that if Alexander wants genuine negotiation, he needs to address the man who is truly in control. Alexander goes still for a heartbeat, processing this insight, and Eleanor sees the moment he adjusts his entire strategy, his posture shifting slightly as he turns his attention from Ravenscroft to the silent advisor and begins speaking directly to the older man in fluid Italian, offering a compromise that redraws boundaries in ways that save face for everyone, while protecting Alexander's core interests. The advisor responds after a long pause, his Italian carrying the accent of Old Sicily, revealing himself as Ravenscroft's uncle, and the elder who built their family's foundation decades ago, and a real negotiation begins between 2 men who understand power and legacy rather than the posturing of younger ambition. Eleanor's observation shifts the entire dynamic of the room, and she watches as agreements take shape through careful discussion, territorial boundaries redrawn with precision, trade arrangements established that benefit multiple families, and peace maintained through the kind of old-world diplomacy that Ravenscroft lacks the experience to appreciate. The meeting concludes with handshakes and formal acknowledgments, but as the families depart, Eleanor catches Ravenscroft staring at her with calculating eyes that hold equal parts resentment and interest. The look of a man who has just realized she is not decorative but functional, and Alexander positions himself between them with a movement so smooth it appears casual, but carries an unmistakable message about possession and protection. Outside in the cool evening air, Alexander pulls Eleanor aside to a quiet corner of the parking structure, his hands framing her face as he tells her that what she did was both dangerous and brilliant, that she inserted herself into a negotiation between violent men and changed its outcome, that she has proven herself capable in his world in ways that go beyond translation or observation. He needs to know, he says with an intensity that makes her breath catch, if this is truly what she wants. A life built around danger and moral compromise, around reading rooms full of criminals and whispering strategy during tense negotiations, because once she fully commits, there is no returning to the safety of invisibility she once knew. Eleanor considers the question seriously, thinking of her mother's safe and well cared for in a facility she could never have afforded before, of her own capabilities finally recognized and used rather than wasted serving coffee and shelving books, and of Alexander himself, complicated and dangerous, and hers, in ways that feel both chosen and inevitable. Eleanor answers Alexander's question with a simplicity that belies the weight of her decision, telling him yes, without hesitation or qualification, that this is what she wants. Not despite the danger, but because of everything she has discovered about herself in his world. The purpose and belonging she never found in her previous life, of invisible survival and quiet desperation. Alexander kisses her there in the dim concrete expanse of the parking structure. The embrace communicating relief and possession and gratitude all tangled together, his hands framing her face as though she is something precious he cannot quite believe he gets to keep, and Eleanor melts into him with the certainty that this complicated, dangerous man has become hers in ways that transcend reason or caution. Weeks pass into months, and Eleanor becomes a permanent fixture in Alexander's organization, her role expanding organically from translator to strategic advisor, as people recognize that her insights carry value beyond linguistic accuracy, that she sees patterns and interprets motivations with fresh eyes unclouded by decades of embedded assumptions. She splits her time between the legitimate restaurant operations and Alexander's less public business dealings, threading the delicate line between worlds with increasing confidence, and the initial skepticism from his inner circle transforms into genuine respect as her contributions prove consistently valuable. Her mother's condition stabilizes with the excellent care that Alexander's money provides, and Eleanor visits the facility regularly, sometimes alone, but often with Alexander accompanying her, and he charms the nursing staff effortlessly, while sitting with patient gentleness during visits, even though her mother no longer recognizes her daughter and responds to them both as pleasant strangers. The gesture cements something fundamental in Eleanor's feelings, because it demonstrates that Alexander's care for her extends to honoring what matters to her, that he will sit in uncomfortable chairs in sterile rooms, making small talk with a woman who does not know him simply because doing so brings Eleanor peace. Catherine formally welcomes Eleanor into the family at a private dinner attended by the core members of the Montague organization, and the acceptance carries weight beyond social nicety, because it means Eleanor is now under family protection with all the safety and expectation that status entails. That harming her means declaring war on the entire organization, but also that her loyalty is assumed permanent and absolute. Alexander takes Eleanor back to the restaurant where they first met on a quiet Tuesday evening, reserving the same corner table where he sat months ago mocking the shy waitress in Italian, and over wine that costs more than Eleanor used to make in a week. He reflects on how that moment changed his entire trajectory, how her courage in responding when she could have stayed safe in silence revealed something in her that he could not ignore or forget. Eleanor admits she almost stayed silent that night. That fear nearly won over pride, and Alexander tells her with complete sincerity that he is grateful every day for her courage then, and in every moment since, for choosing to be seen rather than safe. He produces a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Eleanor's breath catches as he opens it to reveal a ring, antique gold set with a deep red stone that glows like captured fire in the candlelight, not quite an engagement ring, but clearly a promise of intention and commitment. Eleanor accepts without hesitation, sliding the ring onto her right hand where it fits perfectly, Because of course Alexander had her size determined through means she does not question, and they toast to unlikely beginnings and the strange paths that bring people together across barriers of language and class and morality. The shy waitress and the mafia boss, finding each other through an insult answered and building something neither expected from foundations of mutual respect and complicated affection. Outside the restaurant windows, the city glows with the particular magic of evening lights against darkening sky, and Eleanor knows that danger still lurks in every corner of Alexander's world, that rivals will always emerge and challenges will continue, but she has found where she belongs beside a dangerous man who sees her completely and values her entirely, living a life she chose with open eyes and full understanding of its costs and rewards. She is no longer invisible, no longer the forgettable woman Alexander once mocked, but essential and valued and seen. And that transformation makes all the difference. Alexander takes her hand across the table, his thumb brushing over the ring he just gave her with possessive tenderness, and in fluid Italian, he tells her she is his unexpected fortune, the gift he never knew to want. Eleanor responds in the same language, her accent flawless from months of constant practice, telling him he is her chosen risk, the danger she walks toward rather than away from. They leave together into the night, two halves of an improbable whole, ready for whatever comes next in a future they will build together through strategy and stubbornness and the kind of love that grows in complicated soil.